I thought I had it all, a loving wife, a perfect home, and a future built on trust. But then, everything began to unravel. Over the past few months, I started noticing that we were drifting apart. The small, almost invisible signs, the cold good mornings, the distracted glances, and those mysterious late-night phone calls, left me with one burning question: what was really going on with my wife? It all came crashing down one rainy night when I followed her, driven by a mix of heartbreak and desperate need for answers. For years, my wife, Melissa, and I had prided ourselves on what we believed was an unbreakable bond. We built our life together on shared routines, whispered promises in the dark, and a quiet understanding that seemed to defy the passing of time. Yet, over the past several months, something began to change, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that left me feeling increasingly isolated in what was once our safe haven. It started with the small things. Mornings that had once begun with tender kisses and warm smiles slowly turned into hurried goodbyes over mismatched coffee cups. I noticed how Melissa's eyes, once so full of life, now held a distant look, as if she were lost in thoughts that I could not reach. Conversations that used to be filled with laughter and dreams had dwindled into curt exchanges about mundane tasks. I chalked it up to stress from work or perhaps the wear and tear of daily life. But deep down, a gnawing feeling of disquiet took root. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that every marriage goes through phases, and that our connection would eventually rekindle. Yet, as days turned into weeks, I began to see more glaring signs. Our evenings, once a time for us to reconnect over a home-cooked meal, became silent affairs where Melissa retreated into a book or her phone, leaving me to grapple with an overwhelming loneliness. I'd catch fleeting glances of her, moments when her smile wasn't meant for me, when her laughter seemed to echo someone else's joy. It was as if a slow drift had begun, pulling her away from the life we had both worked so hard to create. I remember one evening vividly. I came home a little early from work, excited at the prospect of an impromptu dinner together. As I entered the living room, I found Melissa seated on the couch, her eyes glued to her phone. For a long moment, I stood there in silence, watching as she laughed at something I couldn't see, a private joke, perhaps, or a message that lit up her face with uncharacteristic delight. When she finally looked up, there was a brief flash of guilt in her eyes, quickly replaced by a practiced, polite smile. "Hi," she said, as if nothing were amiss. But that simple greeting couldn't disguise the distance that had crept into her tone. The more I observed, the more the cracks in our relationship began to show. Melissa's schedule, once predictable and shared, now held mysterious gaps. Late nights at home were increasingly replaced by evenings spent out, meetings with friends, book clubs, or spontaneous outings that she described as just what I needed. I tried to brush off my suspicions, convincing myself that she was simply rediscovering herself. After all, wasn't it natural for people to grow and change? Yet, deep in my gut, a painful truth whispered, we were drifting apart. One particularly stormy night, while Melissa was away at one of her get-togethers, I found myself alone with a torrent of thoughts. The silence in our house was deafening. I scrolled through old photographs on my laptop, images of us laughing under summer skies, embracing beneath twinkling city lights, and sharing secret smiles that once promised forever. The contrast between those memories and the present was stark. I began to wonder when exactly the shift had occurred, and whether I had been too blind, or too complacent, to notice. As I mulled over these questions, a nagging thought surfaced: had Melissa found someone else? The idea sent shivers down my spine, even as I fought to dismiss it as mere paranoia. Still, the way she seemed to light up whenever she mentioned a new friend, in passing, the subtle shift in her tone, and the way she guarded her phone as if it held the answers to a hidden world, it all began to paint a picture that I couldn't ignore. I resolved that I needed to understand what was happening, not only for the sake of our marriage but for my own peace of mind. I started keeping mental notes of every anomaly, the times when her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes, the vague excuses about her whereabouts, and the furtive glances exchanged when she thought I wasn't looking. Each detail, insignificant on its own, began to form a pattern of growing disconnection. The realization was both heartbreaking and terrifying. We were on the brink of losing something that had once defined us. That night, as I lay awake in our bed with the relentless tick of the clock echoing in the darkness, I knew I couldn't let the silence continue any longer. The drift was real, and the possibility that she might have found someone else was a truth too painful to ignore. With a heavy heart and a mind full of questions, I resolved to dig deeper into the mystery of our unraveling intimacy. In the days following that stormy night of restless introspection, I found myself becoming increasingly vigilant, almost obsessively so. Every moment of our daily routine began to feel laden with hidden meaning, a covert message in a raised eyebrow, a hesitant smile, a phone screen that lit up with secret notifications. I knew I needed to gather concrete evidence, to separate the whispers of my anxious imagination from the reality of what was happening. It started with the small details. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, I noticed that Melissa's phone buzzed repeatedly. The sound wasn't alarming on its own, but what caught my attention was her furtive glance toward it, almost as if she were expecting something she couldn't share. I tried to brush it off as an innocent habit. After all, people do get absorbed in work emails and group chats. But soon, a pattern began to emerge. Late afternoons that were once reserved for our joint routines began to take on an air of mystery. I'd return home from work, only to find Melissa engrossed in long phone calls in another room, her tone unexpectedly animated and her laughter too light. When I inquired casually about her day, she'd offer vague responses, just catching up with someone about some plans, or, it's nothing, really. The more I listened, the more I sensed that there was a side of her life I had never been privy to, a side that was growing louder with each passing day. Driven by both hurt and a desperate need to understand, I started piecing together the timeline of her absences and sudden mood changes. I recalled a particular evening when I arrived home early from a late meeting. The house was unnervingly quiet, and Melissa was nowhere to be found in our living room. Instead, I discovered her tucked away in the study, whispering into the phone with a tone that oscillated between excitement and nervousness. I couldn't make out the conversation, but the urgency in her voice left me unsettled. I wondered, was this just a work-related emergency, or was it something else entirely? One weekend, when I decided to clear my head by taking a long drive, I accidentally passed a part of town I didn't recognize, a vibrant, bustling district with trendy cafes and neon signs. It wasn't a place we had ever visited together. Later that day, Melissa mentioned meeting a friend for coffee in that very area. My heart sank as I recalled the light in her eyes when she spoke of this friend, a brightness that had been absent in our shared moments lately. That evening, I found myself sifting through Melissa's social media, searching for clues among tagged photos and cryptic status updates. There were hints, a candid snapshot of her smiling in a cafe, a boomerang video where she and an unknown figure laughed together as if sharing a secret joke. The images were posted on days when she'd claimed to be busy at home, and the dates didn't always match up with her explanations. A strange chill ran down my spine as I began to suspect that the friend she spoke so fondly of might be more than a casual acquaintance. The tipping point came on a drizzly Thursday night. I was alone in our living room, the sound of rain tapping against the windows, when Melissa's phone rang. I couldn't see who was calling, but as I lay there in the dim light, I heard her answer softly, "Yes, I'm on my way." Her voice carried a warmth that was foreign to the cold distance I'd been feeling lately. I pressed myself against the door, heart hammering, straining to catch every word. All I heard was a hurried, "I'll see you soon," before the call ended abruptly. A surge of panic mixed with a dark curiosity compelled me to check our call history later that night. There it was, a series of calls to a number I didn't recognize. I tried to rationalize it as perhaps a work contact or a friend from another circle, but the frequency was unnerving. Each call had occurred at odd hours, and the duration of the calls was always short, leaving me to wonder if they were discreet check-ins rather than genuine conversations. By the end of the week, I had amassed a small collection of inconsistencies, unexplained absences, cryptic phone behavior, and social media clues that painted a picture of a life Melissa was leading without me. Every piece of evidence, while individually ambiguous, began to form a pattern that was impossible to ignore. I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that Melissa had found someone else, a person who seemed to fill the void that our marriage had gradually left. As I lay awake that night, haunted by the murmurs of missed phone calls and hushed conversations, I realized that I stood at the precipice of a truth I was both terrified and desperate to confront. The slow drift we'd been experiencing was no longer just a natural phase of change, it was something more calculated, more deliberate, and the implications were as heartbreaking as they were inevitable. That rainy Thursday night, the storm outside mirrored the turbulence inside me. I couldn't shake the mounting evidence of Melissa's secretive behavior, the furtive phone calls, the mysterious absences, and the dissonant energy that had taken over our once comfortable home. Determined to face the truth, I resolved to follow her that evening, even if it meant stepping into a world I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. After a long, agonizing wait, I saw her leave in a rush. Clad in a coat that concealed more than just her figure, Melissa stepped out of our house under the cover of darkness. My heart pounded as I slipped into my car and tailed her at a safe distance. The rain blurred the streetlights as I watched her turn onto an unfamiliar road, a route that didn't lead to our usual grocery store or the neighbors' houses. Instead, it wound its way toward a part of town that I barely recognized, an area lit by neon signs, with upscale storefronts and quiet, dimly lit corridors. My pulse quickened when I noticed her car slowing down in front of an inconspicuous building, a modern, glass-paneled structure that looked out of place among the old brick facades around it. I parked a few cars back and watched through the rain-spattered windshield as Melissa stepped out and walked purposefully toward the entrance. Every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly off. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow. Slipping out of my car, I kept to the shadows as I trailed her down a narrow alley that led to the building's side entrance. From a safe distance, I peered through a window and saw Melissa in a softly lit lobby, glancing around nervously before heading toward an elevator. The air inside the building felt charged with a secrecy I hadn't felt in years, almost as if every step she took was a leap into a hidden chapter of her life. My mind whirled with questions: who was waiting for her in that building? And why did the mere sight of her here send such a chill down my spine? I parked again a block away and decided to wait for answers. It wasn't long before I saw her exit through a side door. Standing just a few feet away was a man I didn't recognize. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding yet strangely gentle. The two exchanged a brief, almost secretive embrace that lasted only a few seconds, but in that moment, I saw something in their eyes, a warmth and familiarity that felt alien to the distance I had been sensing at home. They walked together toward a sleek, modern cafe tucked away on a quiet street. I followed at a discreet distance, my mind racing with a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. Every step brought me closer to an unthinkable truth: my wife, the woman I had believed was my lifelong partner, was now sharing moments of laughter and intimacy with someone else. Hiding in the shadows outside the cafe, I pressed my face against the cold glass of a window. Inside, Melissa and the mysterious man, whom I now overheard she called James, sat at a secluded table. Their conversation was low and animated. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught fragments. "I've missed this connection," she said softly, and James replied, "You deserve to be heard, to be understood." Her tone was tender, almost vulnerable, an intimacy I hadn't witnessed in our home for a long time. The scene left me reeling. My mind raced with conflicting emotions: betrayal, pain, and an aching sense of abandonment. I wondered if all the signs I had been noticing, the distant phone glances, the unexplained texts, the late-night absences, were pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to assemble until now. Every moment of our recent past flashed before my eyes: the missed conversations, the silent dinners, the emptiness I felt in our bed. And here it was, the undeniable evidence that Melissa had found solace in the arms of another. Just as I was about to retreat, a twist I hadn't anticipated occurred. My eyes caught a reflection in the cafe window, a flash of movement behind me. I turned sharply, heart hammering, and saw a figure slipping away into the darkness. For an instant, I wondered if I wasn't the only one following the trail of secrets that night. Was there someone else involved? A friend, a confidant, or perhaps another shadowy presence with motives as murky as my own? The encounter at the cafe shattered the fragile illusion that our marriage could be patched up with simple conversations. The pain of her betrayal mixed with the urgency of questions about that unknown figure in the background. Who was this mysterious person lurking in the periphery of Melissa's new life, and how did they fit into the mosaic of her shifting affections? I was left with more questions than answers as I retreated into the night. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, but the chill in my heart remained. Every moment of that encounter was etched into my memory, the way Melissa's eyes sparkled when she spoke with James, the subtle intimacy of their touch, and the fleeting glimpse of another presence that hinted at deeper, darker layers in this unfolding drama. As I drove home in silence, the weight of what I had witnessed pressed down on me. I knew that the revelation of this clandestine meeting was only the beginning. There were secrets to unravel, questions to answer, and a marriage that was now hanging by a thread. And deep down, I wondered if the drifting apart was inevitable, or if there remained a chance to salvage what was left of our love. The shock of that rainy Thursday night still reverberated in my mind as I replayed the clandestine meeting in my head. I couldn't shake the image of Melissa and James sharing an intimate moment in that dimly lit cafe, nor could I forget the fleeting glimpse of a mysterious figure lurking in the background. Every detail had carved itself into my memory, and the pain of betrayal had morphed into a burning need for answers. That very evening, unable to endure the torment of uncertainty any longer, I resolved to confront Melissa. My hands trembled as I sat her down in our living room, the once familiar space now feeling like an alien territory laden with secrets. The ambient glow of our table lamp highlighted the sorrow etched on her face, a face that had once been my sanctuary but now appeared strained with guilt and hidden stories. "Melissa," I began, my voice hoarse with pent-up anguish, "we need to talk. I know about the cafe, about James." The words spilled out in a rush, laden with both accusation and despair. I watched as her eyes widened in shock, then darted away, as if trying to hide the truth from me. For a long, painful minute, silence enveloped the room. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat a reminder of everything I feared was slipping away. After what seemed like an eternity, she sighed, a heavy, resigned sound, and said softly, "I didn't want it to come to this." Her voice was trembling, and I sensed an avalanche of emotions behind those guarded eyes. I never meant to hurt you. I was lonely, and you were so caught up in your work, our routines. I felt invisible. Her words tumbled out haltingly, each syllable carrying the weight of a secret she'd held too long. I leaned forward, searching her face for any sign of the Melissa I once knew. Invisible? So, you found someone who made you feel seen? I asked bitterly, the question slicing through the air. Who is he, Melissa? And why did you never tell me you were hurting? Tears began to form in her eyes as she struggled to articulate what had been festering inside her for months. "James isn't what you think," she whispered. "He's not just some lover, he was there when I felt completely alone, when everything around us seemed to fall apart. I was drifting, and he made me feel alive, listened to me when I felt like no one else would." The confession stung like a lash. I felt anger rising, anger not only at the betrayal but also at the realization that our marriage had crumbled so quietly, so insidiously, without us even noticing until it was too late. "But why, Melissa?" I demanded. "Why didn't you come to me? Why let this stranger in when we could have fixed what was breaking?" Her eyes filled with tears as she looked away, her voice barely audible. I was scared, and I felt trapped. Every time I tried to reach out, it was like there was a wall between us. I thought James could tear that wall down. Her words echoed in the charged silence that followed. I struggled to contain a mix of rage, sorrow, and a desperate need for understanding. "I was always here for you," I managed, the bitterness evident in my tone. "We built this life together, and I believed we were in it together. Instead, you chose someone else, someone who wasn't even part of our promise." Melissa's sob broke the silence, a sound filled with regret and the realization of her own choices. "I never meant to break our vows. Sometimes I felt so alone. And James, he made me feel understood in ways I couldn't even explain." At that moment, a tension hung heavy between us, a fragile bridge over a chasm of lost trust. The room seemed to contract with the force of our shared pain. I could see that her eyes were pleading for forgiveness even as mine burned with betrayal. In that raw, vulnerable confrontation, the facade of our perfect marriage was stripped away, revealing the scars beneath. I felt torn between the desire to salvage what remained and the overwhelming need to confront the betrayal head-on. Before I could gather my next words, a sudden knock on the door startled us both. It was as if the universe had timed the interruption perfectly, a knock that forced us to pause and consider the ramifications of our confrontation. I opened the door to find a delivery person with a sealed envelope. On it, my name was written in an elegant, unfamiliar script. With trembling hands, I brought it back into the living room. Melissa's eyes widened as I broke the seal and unfolded the note. The message was cryptic, almost like a riddle. "The truth is deeper than the hurt you feel. Look beyond the surface to uncover what was lost." It was a final, chilling twist that neither of us had anticipated. Who had sent this note? Was it connected to James, or did it hint at a larger mystery behind our unraveling marriage? The envelope felt like a key, one that promised to unlock even darker secrets hidden beneath our surface pain. As I held the note in my hand, the gravity of our situation pressed down on us both. In that moment, our confrontation transformed from a simple exchange of hurt feelings into a quest for the deeper truth behind our drifting apart. I knew that answering these questions would force us to revisit memories we'd both tried to forget, and confront secrets that might alter the course of our lives forever. The envelope's cryptic message, "The truth is deeper than the hurt you feel. Look beyond the surface to uncover what was lost," haunted me long after that shattering confrontation. I couldn't let those words fade into silence. Instead, I found myself compelled to search for hidden meanings, to peel back yet another layer of the unraveling tapestry of our lives. Over the next few days, I pored over every scrap of evidence that had accumulated. I reread old emails, re-examined our text conversations, and even rifled through photographs stored away in forgotten folders on my computer. The phrase, "what was lost," echoed in my mind, and I began to wonder if it wasn't merely a lament for our fading intimacy, but a deliberate clue, one planted by someone with a hidden agenda. Late one night, I sat in the dim glow of my study, clutching the envelope as if it were a lifeline. I recalled memories of a time when Melissa and I were inseparable, when laughter and shared dreams defined our days. Could that cherished past be the lost piece referenced in the note? Or was there something far more sinister at work? My investigation soon took an unexpected turn. While scouring our old digital files, I discovered a folder labeled with an unfamiliar code, a series of numbers and letters that I couldn't decipher at first glance. Intrigued, I opened it and found a collection of scanned documents, photographs, and even voice memos. Among these items was a series of photos featuring Melissa with a man I didn't recognize. One image, in particular, caught my attention, a candid shot of Melissa laughing, her arm around this mysterious figure. The photo was dated several years back, a time I'd never associated with any hint of trouble. Yet, the subtle intimacy in that picture sent a chill down my spine. As I dug deeper, I found more clues that blurred the lines between our personal life and an unsettling external force. There were anonymous emails from an address I couldn't trace, their subject lines cryptically hinting at betrayal and the architect's plan. One email read, "When trust crumbles, the foundation falls. Rebuild what was lost, or watch it all shatter." It was as if someone, or something, had been orchestrating events from behind the scenes, ensuring that our once solid foundation was deliberately eroded. The plot thickened further when I discovered that James, the man I had seen with Melissa at the cafe, was not a stranger at all. In a forgotten social media album on Melissa's account, I found snapshots of her and a man labeled only as J in handwritten notes. The photos portrayed a past friendship, one filled with shared confidences and laughter. It appeared that James had been a part of her life long before I ever sensed any drift between us. Had Melissa rekindled an old connection, or was this friend being used as a pawn in a larger, more deliberate game? Every revelation pulled me deeper into a maze of uncertainty. I began to suspect that our gradual separation might not have been a natural drift at all, but the result of a carefully engineered plan. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone from my past, perhaps a business rival or an old enemy, trying to sabotage my marriage? Or was there a hidden network, a secret cabal that thrived on watching relationships crumble, using personal betrayals as currency for power and control? In the midst of these dark thoughts, a final twist emerged. One evening, while reviewing the call logs on my phone, I noticed a series of calls from a number I didn't recognize. The timestamps coincided with some of Melissa's mysterious outings. Hesitantly, I called the number back. After several rings, a distorted voice answered, uttering a single word, "Remember." Before I could press for further details, the line went dead. The word echoed in my mind, and I couldn't help but recall fragments of a conversation from years ago, a conversation I'd shared with a close friend about a shadow from my past, someone who had once vowed revenge for a long-forgotten slight. It was then that I realized the true horror of my situation. The drifting apart wasn't simply about lost intimacy or a newfound affair, it might have been the calculated work of an unseen adversary, determined to dismantle everything I'd built. The envelope's message, the hidden photos, the anonymous emails, and that single, chilling phone call all pointed to a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the boundaries of our marriage. With my heart pounding and my mind a storm of questions, I knew one thing for certain: the truth was deeper, darker, and far more convoluted than I ever could have imagined. The trail was growing colder even as new clues emerged, and I was left standing on the precipice of a revelation that might change everything. That cold, gray morning, as I sat alone in the silence of our living room, every revelation from the past few weeks converged into a single, crushing realization: nothing about our lives was as it seemed. The evidence, the furtive phone calls, the clandestine meetings, the mysterious messages, and that chilling phone call from a stranger saying, "Remember," had led me down a rabbit hole of betrayal, conspiracy, and secrets. I felt as though I were standing at the edge of a vast precipice, staring into a void where the truth, dark and twisted, awaited. I couldn't let it go any longer. With trembling resolve, I decided to confront the final pieces of this puzzle. I arranged a meeting with Detective Parker, determined to get every detail about the investigation that had so unexpectedly crashed into our lives. In a sparse, sterile interrogation room at the precinct, I laid out every clue I had gathered. Parker listened intently, his expression unreadable as he flipped through his notes. After a long, heavy pause, he leaned forward and said, "There's something you need to know. It appears that your marital troubles, and Melissa's involvement with this friend, were not merely personal failures or random coincidences." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you mean?" I demanded, voice quivering with a mix of anger and dread. Parker's eyes darkened as he explained that an external player had been manipulating the situation from the start. "There's evidence that someone from your past, a person you trusted in your professional circle, has been orchestrating events behind the scenes. Their motive? To undermine your personal and business life simultaneously. It seems that your drifting apart wasn't just about Melissa finding solace in another man, it was about creating a diversion, a carefully engineered distraction to make you vulnerable." I stared, numb, as Parker continued. He revealed that encrypted emails and anonymous texts hinted at a high-stakes corporate vendetta. Melissa's friend, James, and even the elusive Lisa weren't random characters in a sordid love triangle, they were part of a sophisticated plan. According to the detective, this mastermind had exploited Melissa's feelings of neglect to lure her into a covert alliance. Every seemingly tender moment between her and James, every secret rendezvous, was designed not only to pull her away from me but also to destabilize my confidence and distract me from a looming corporate takeover that had been in motion for years. As if that revelation wasn't enough, Parker then produced a final piece of evidence, a recording from that mysterious phone call. The distorted voice, echoing, "Remember," wasn't just a warning, it was a trigger. In the background of the recording, barely audible over the static, I recognized a familiar cadence, the voice of an old friend, someone who had once been a trusted business partner. The realization was gut-wrenching. The person I had once considered an ally was the very architect of the chaos that now engulfed my life. When I returned home, my mind was a storm of disbelief and sorrow. I confronted Melissa one last time in our dimly lit kitchen. "Did you know about this?" I demanded, voice raw. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought James could help me find some truth in a world that was tearing me apart. I didn't know it was all part of someone else's plan." The weight of her confession, mingled with my own bitter revelations, left us both shattered. In the final hours of that tumultuous day, as rain began to drum on the windows like a dirge, I realized that our marriage had been caught in the crossfire of a much larger war, a war waged in the shadows of corporate greed, personal betrayal, and calculated manipulation. The drifting apart, the secret meetings, and even the anonymous phone call were all pieces of a puzzle designed to distract and destroy. And now, with the truth laid bare, I was faced with an impossible choice: to fight back against the hidden enemy, or to let the devastation of betrayal consume me entirely. As I sat there, heart pounding and mind reeling, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same. The final twist wasn't just that Melissa had found someone else, it was that our entire world had been manipulated by forces far beyond our control. And as the night swallowed the last light of day, I vowed that the coming battle, both personal and professional, would be fought with every ounce of strength I had left.